Hi, my name is Karim Mousa and I'm the Senior Vice President for Electric Mobility at Siemens Middle East. So at Siemens eMobility, we're helping cities transform to be able to adapt to this transition that we're witnessing in the mobility sector, which is a transition away from conventional vehicles with internal combustion engines towards electric vehicles. Today you can see a lot of electric vehicles on the roads, and this adaptation or transformation will continue to increase, but one thing that needs to be adapted equally as fast is smart infrastructure or charging infrastructure that enables us to charge these vehicles to continue their journey. It's a bit of a chicken and egg equation. If you put a lot of vehicles on the road without the ability to charge them, then you will not be able to move around cities efficiently and comfortably, and the drivers will continue to have what we call range anxiety. So we at Siemens eMobility, we're working with governments, both the public and the private sector, to ensure that we have efficient, reliable, and comfortable charging infrastructure across smart cities in the Middle East. The installation or implementation of EV charging infrastructure across cities entails various elements. One of them is obviously the charger itself, right? And you have different types of chargers. You have both the AC chargers, which are, I would say, on the slower side, more suitable for residential or office spaces, or where drivers would essentially leave their cars parked for extended periods of time. The other type of charger that you have is DC charger, which is essentially a supercharger or a fast charger, which is more suitable to be installed in highways or service stations or petrol stations in a location where essentially where drivers are expecting to receive a top-up to their battery in a relatively quick manner. So this covers the charger perspective, but of course the charger is connected to its environment. And the first element of its environment is the grid, right? So without a reliable grid that can provide enough capacity, you would not be able to install these kind of chargers. And this is a very important point, because if we are expecting truly this EV transformation to take place in our cities, that means you're going to have thousands or even millions eventually of electric vehicles in our streets. What that means is your charging requirement is going to increase. You'll need thousands or millions more chargers. But then where is this power coming from? Right? It needs to come from the grid. It needs to come from reliable green energy sources, such as solar, such as wind, or others. And this is really where the grid edge, where the charger meets the distribution network, this is a very important element, and it actually, with which without, charging infrastructure cannot exist. Right? So first you have the chargers, then you have the grid connection, then you also have distributed energy systems, right? Because the grid on its own also will not be able to meet with all the required demand, especially in remote areas or areas where it might not be necessary to have a full-blown grid, right? So then you would have decentralized energy systems, which form little microgrids that then charging infrastructure and other infrastructure can connect to. These could also include solar, battery, and other integrated energy systems. So I would say there's various components, and these are three key ones. So when we talk about off-grid charging installations, so at Siemens Middle East, we've already implemented a number of off-grid installations in the GCC in particular, and these were focused installations in areas where either the grid is not available, or the grid is available, but it's simply not strong enough. And where the property developer or landowner wishes to install or provide a number of charging outlets and stations for their drivers, with a weak grid, this becomes a significant challenge. So these off-grid energy installations or decentralized energy systems become quite important. And these would typically consist of solar, battery, so solar and battery components integrated with a number of charging stations. And these systems could be containerized. Right, so these solar battery systems could be manufactured and already pre-configured in a location and then shipped as a container to the location where you need the power. In other cases, it could be a little bit more complicated, where you need a lot more power, so you would need multiple of these containers. But obviously, the one thing we also need to pay attention to here is the impact on the business case, right? Because installing a charger and connecting it to the grid is one thing, but then installing a charger and requiring an additional decentralized energy system like a battery or a solar plant to power this charger is a whole different cost adder. Right? And this is where it becomes important to consider the business case. Does it make sense to connect and expand the existing grid connection, or does it make sense to invest in these decentralized energy systems that could provide power to the charging systems, but also to the surrounding loads? So we have a number of main drivers that are really, I would say, fueling this transition towards the electrification of mobility, right? And if we talk about the charging infrastructure market, one of the main drivers, I would have to say in the Middle East, would be government strategy, right? So we have a number of governments, including the government of the UAE, that have committed to net zero targets by a certain date, in this case 2050. And as part of these commitments, the governments are taking action and passing legislation to allow the public and private sector to begin to implement charging infrastructure. Now, in many cases, it's again this chicken and egg equation, right? There's not enough vehicles on the road today, but if you want people to adopt and move towards electric vehicles, then you need to make sure that the charging infrastructure exists first. So this would be one of the first market drivers. Really, it's government strategy and government initiative driving the mass expansion of EV charging infrastructure across the region. The other driver or catalyst would be the vehicle manufacturers themselves. So a lot of them have already also set strategies to move their portfolio, their vehicle portfolios towards electric vehicles. In order to do that, you need to also enable the charging infrastructure market to boom, and you need to make sure that your drivers would gain enough or have enough options and availability of charging points to be able to top up their cars in a very convenient, fast and reliable manner. And as a result, electric vehicle manufacturers are themselves also investing in these charging networks and putting a lot of effort, both financially and in terms of time, to make sure that there is plenty of charging infrastructure installed across their key markets. Right, so I would say it's largely driven by government legislation, and at the same time this drive from EV manufacturers to position their vehicles or their future vehicles in our Middle East markets. So over the next 5 years, I would say there will probably be a few key trends that we are going to witness. One of them will obviously be wireless charging. So Siemens is already actively working on wireless charging technology, which would essentially mean that drivers are able to charge their vehicles without having to get out and plugging in their cars. This will no doubt become a trend, both in the residential, commercial, and perhaps public infrastructure spaces. Another trend to look out for is vehicle-to-grid technology. What that means is, essentially, if you look at the flow of power today, it's coming from the grid to the vehicle, right, through the charger. Vehicle-to-grid allows the reverse flow of energy from the vehicle to the grid. So what that means is, as a driver of an electric vehicle, I can begin to power my home. If I'm on a camping trip, I can power my tent, I can provide electricity to my surroundings, and this will provide a completely different dynamic in how drivers and grids interact. Right? We're no longer just consumers, we're able to also support the grid, maybe in peak shaving times or in emergency power requirements with these moving power banks, which is essentially our cars. Maybe the last trend, or not the last trend, it's a third trend, but there's many trends that we can talk about. But a third trend will also be megawatt charging, which is also something where Siemens is actively invested in working on. Megawatt charging essentially is extremely high powered and fast charging, which will be essentially designed for electric trucks and electric buses, right? So we're looking at long haul transportation, where these trucks with huge batteries need much bigger chargers than the conventional ones, like the one you see behind me. Megawatt charging would allow us to enable this sort of long haul transport and long haul delivery by being able to provide these trucks with charging in a relatively fast manner. Then of course we go back to the grid challenge, which is how do you ensure that you have these megawatts available on site? And the answer will be again with more resilient, reliable grids and decentralized energy systems, solar, battery, etc.